Hello Traceable Designers. Today we're making the Traceable Designer Scalloped Cornice Valance. We will be making side panels that include no-sew rod hanging pockets. We're also going to make a center panel to fit over the side panels, and we'll talk about fabric print alignment and how to adjust your design form to make sure that's centered perfectly. This valance can also be made with additional center panels to fit any window size. To make our valance, we're using the Traceable Designer Cornice style valance design form. This is the scalloped style. It's used to make the side panels with a rod pocket and also the center panel that velcros over the side panels. Side panels are always made using the outside sizing line. This gives you a fuller side area to wrap around your curtain rod. You can also make that a little wider if you have a deeper rod. Then we're making a small center panel. The center panel sizing line for the height line is the same as the lined fabric positioning marker for the side panels. If you're using fabric that has a print, you want to make sure that's centered in the middle of your center panel and also balanced for your side panels. So determine your placement, and that will be exactly half, where you will fold your fabric section in half to make your center panel. And then when you do your positioning, make sure you're using the proper sizing line. So when you determine your center fold, you want to make sure it's positioned where the full design form size will actually fit. And this one works perfectly because I'm making a small center panel. In addition to your width sizing, make sure that the bottom edge of your design form falls below the design, the style that you're looking to capture. So make sure your placement is proper for that before you cut your fabric to size. Always remember to add extra fabric, especially on the bottom, because when you do your placement, you need your backing to fall and your lining to fall below where you plan to trace. Once you've finished sizing your fabric section, turn it with the back side facing out and pull out your fusible backing. You need to position that below where the lower part of the design form will fall. Now this is the small sizing line, so that's different than the outside edge, and you make sure that it covers the whole fabric section where you plan to trace. So I'm putting the knobby side facing down, the glue side, and the paper side facing up, and then positioning the design form on top while I slide the paper down to make sure there's full coverage over my design. Then you need to make sure that it's straight across the top. You don't want an uneven or a crooked looking panel, so identify the design and place the paper across that design so it's nice and straight. You may need to adjust the fabric so that that's straight before you start to fuse. To fuse your backing, always start in the center with a sweeping motion out toward the sides using a dry iron with no steam, and keep the iron moving the entire time. So make sure your steam is turned off and you have medium-high heat, and sweep from the center out toward the sides, taking your time, keeping the iron moving until your backing is fully adhered to the back side of your fabric. Make sure you don't hold it in one place or you can create iron marks. So sweep across the backing and then check the edges to make sure it's completely fused before peeling off the paper. Once the paper has completely cooled, carefully peel it back and try to keep it in one piece so you can use that to cover your ironing board when you glue on your edge trim. So now it's time to attach our lining. Cut a piece of lining that is large enough to cover all of the exposed glue all around the edges, and we're just going to use a sweeping motion from the center out, again taking our time to fuse the lining. Now the reason we move from the center out with a sweeping motion is because you want to avoid fabric buckling. So I'm using a careful sweeping motion, keeping the iron moving. This is sort of a slow process. You'll move across the middle out toward the sides and then go over it a second time or a third time until the lining has completely sealed to the exposed glue. You'll actually start to see the edges coming through the lining so you can tell that it's fully fused. So once your lining is completely fused, you'll make sure you fold your fabric section in half. So if you do have a print, it's completely straight up and down. You can use an iron to run across the crease to make sure it's straight. Then just pin your fabric section to make sure that holds in place when you trace. Check to make sure you're hovering over your print, but not falling below where the lining is fused to the fabric. Put it on the proper sizing line. I'm using the small sizing line, so I will be tracing around the design form and then lowering the form to trace the fabric height cut line. So I'm beginning my tracing at the center panel fabric height cut line That is the 15.5-inch marker, and carefully tracing along the design form edge, holding the design form flat against the fabric so it doesn't move as I'm tracing along to the folded edge, and then just retrace if you need to make sure it's a very clear line. Once you've finished that, just place a little mark out to the right of the center panel height line, and then lower the design form to trace across the top edge. You want to make sure the left sizing line is aligned across the fold so it's nice and straight before you trace across the top of the design form to indicate the height cut line. To cut out your center panel, begin on the folded edge at the lower corner, and then just simply follow around your traced line to carefully cut out your panel. Then turn the fabric so that the cut side is facing you, and then just cut right across the top of the panel height cut line. Then just open your panel and run an iron across the fabric. You may see a little bit of separation, a little bit of buckling. Just carefully run the iron on top of that, and that will flatten right out. To make the Valance side panels, I'm sizing the fabric using a folded fabric section. The fabric print should be even on both sides, so using it folded exactly in half with the factory width usually works pretty well. We will be positioning the fusible backing along the lined fabric positioning marker, making sure that the backing falls below the bottom and you still have plenty of room on top for your rod pocket. Again, very important that the fabric is straight. Find your mark and then adjust your fabric and your backing until it's completely straight across the top. Then you'll start in the center using a sweeping motion out to the side, the same as with the center panel. Now, my fabric's a little bit short, so my backing is actually longer than the fabric. So I'm anchoring it along the top to make sure that's straight first, moving down toward the bottom. Then I'm going to fold the backing up so that I can cut that off so that it doesn't get fused to the ironing board during the process. Then once the paper is completely cooled, peel it back to expose the glue. Then we're cutting a piece of lining that will extend past both sides along the bottom with a very straight edge across the top of the fabric glue. So you're going to align that across the top edge of your glue with a straight edge, and again starting in the middle with a sweeping motion, you'll begin in the center, sweeping out toward the sides, and then just keep adjusting the lining to make sure it's straight across the top of the glue, sweeping down and out to the sides until you've completely fused the lining to the fabric section. To trace the side panels, make sure you have a very crisp fold and you're positioning the outside edge of the design form along the folded edge. This is to give you a wider area to curve around the rod returns. You can make that a little bit wider by sliding inside of the edge if you need a couple of extra inches for an extra deep return. Make sure your lined fabric positioning marker is straight across the lining top edge and your outer left edge is against the fold. Also make sure that your fabric is adhered below the design form, so you're tracing on top of fused lining. Then just pin your fabric section, beginning at the top edge of the lining. Just trace around the design form, following the curved side. Make sure you press down on the design form so that it doesn't move, and progress all the way down to the curved or to the folded fabric section. Then you're going to slide the fabric down, trace up the right side, and then across the top of the design form to mark the fabric height cut line to make your unlined rod pocket section. This is a little harder to trace on top of the fabric, so you might have to go over it a couple of times to get a nice clear line. Pin your fabric section to hold it, then starting on the folded lower edge, just follow the trace line around the curved area, making nice crisp cuts all the way around the bottom and then up the side, and then turn the panel facing you with the cut side facing you, and then just cut right across the top to straighten out that rod pocket cut line. Since we will be cutting this fabric section in half, I like to put a crease with the iron on the edge so it's nice and clear where the center is, and then just cut right up the middle to separate the panels, making two separate side panels. To hang the side panels, we use a no-sew rod hanging pocket, so fold the fabric section over to meet the top edge of the lining and then iron to flatten that down. Then cut a piece of fusible backing to fit inside of that folded section without overlapping onto the lining or onto your ironing board. Then just iron that right across the top of that pocket area to deposit the glue. Once it's cooled, then just peel the paper off and then pull that pocket taut over top of the lining. Then just use the iron to fuse the backing to the back side of the lining. This will create an open pocket, so make sure that you continue to fuse across that pocket until it's completely sealed. To finish the panels, I'm using a flat 3/8 inch gimp trim. This is a braided trim. Always make sure you have plenty of excess so you don't run short. And to attach the trim, I'm using Unique Stitch, which is a tube fabric glue. So it's a good idea to flatten out your trim so it's nice and even when you do start to attach it. So I just pull it underneath an iron before I begin. Then starting at the upper edge, I'm just putting a really thin line of glue following along the edge, and then make sure that your trim does extend about 1 inch above the panel top edge, and then just carefully follow along the shape. This is really important that you take your time with this, get it nice and even, make sure it follows the shape of the panel. When you use a tube glue, you can reposition it as you go. This will make a big difference in how professional looking your panel does turn out. So just follow it along, taking your time, repositioning, double check to make sure it's nice and straight until you get all the way around to the other side, and then just fasten those edges behind the panel. Follow the same process for the side panels. Do the bottom edge first, then cut it flush at the curved lower edge. Then use a straight piece across the side on the wall side, and then just fasten the trim behind the panel on the bottom and the top. So our final step is to hang our valance. So pull out your Velcro that's included in your kit, and we're going to prepare the valance panels and the valance rod. The valance rod uses the hard side Velcro between the side panels to catch the center panel on the back of the rod. Begin by determining the space between your side panels, and then you'll cut sections of hard side Velcro to fit inside of your 2.5 inch wide pocket curtain rod. So remove the paper and then just insert that right into the back of the rod, so that will be the receiving Velcro for the Velcro on your center panel. Since the rod pocket on the side panels covers the rod, you need to put the same hard side Velcro on the side panels to catch the center panel when it folds over the rod. To do this, you have to cut sections of fusible backing for this to hold. So we're going to be cutting sections of fusible backing to match up with the rod Velcro and to also match up with the Velcro that will be on the back of the side panels. So you'll fuse that down on both the back side of the center panel and onto the rod pocket. Then just remove the backing paper to expose the glue, and then you can use your sticky back soft side Velcro on the top edge of your center panels. So you can just stick that right on the exposed glue, so that will hold long term. Otherwise that'll just fall right off, so make sure you don't skip this step. Then just slip your side panels right onto the rod, and then you'll position your center panel between your side panels and fasten it to the back of the rod and the back of your side panels, and you'll be ready to hang your beautiful new scallop style valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.